My name is Evelyn, and I'm 34 years old. I live with my husband James, and we are both employed by the company founded by my father-in-law. Although my father-in-law has retired, he single-handedly transformed a small construction company into a $250 billion annual revenue enterprise, even acquiring rival construction companies. While he may have been forceful at times, everyone admires his remarkable business acumen. James, who was chosen to follow in his father's footsteps, was raised as a spoiled child and possesses a gentle character. However, I fear that his gentle nature doesn't align well with the harsh world of business. In reality, he tends to be incredibly indecisive, and I've started to question his suitability not only as a husband but also as a CEO. James himself has admitted that he's not cut out to be a CEO and would likely just be a figurehead if he were to assume that role. It seems he has no real intention of taking over the company seriously. We've been married for 5 years, and lately I've grown frustrated with his lack of initiative. In contrast to James, I consider myself to be quite decisive. My father-in-law appreciated this about me during his active years and often delegated various tasks to me before marrying James. I worked at a bank, so managing finances and keeping the numbers in mind came naturally to me. Initially, I had planned to become a full-time homemaker after marriage, but my father-in-law requested that I work for the construction company. Instead, shortly after I began working there, my father-in-law started inviting me to board meetings and seeking my opinion on management matters. Initially, the board members were skeptical about including the founder's daughter-in-law in important meetings, but as I consistently provided relevant insights, they began to listen to my suggestions. Although James was also a board member, he rarely attended meetings, and this was considered the norm by the other board members and my father-in-law. One day, when I returned home from a meeting, I found James nonchalantly watching TV, angered by his absence. I asked him why he didn't attend the meeting, emphasizing his key role and the need for seriousness. To my dismay, he showed no remorse and replied that he didn't understand the discussions and that the board members preferred me. I couldn't help but wonder if he was irritated by my active participation in the board meetings. Despite James's remarks, my father-in-law continued teaching me the intricacies of running the business and seemed to groom me as his successor. I began to enjoy being involved in the management and unknowingly started striving to meet my father-in-law's expectations. Approximately 2 years after I started attending meetings, my father-in-law retired completely. During major decision-making processes, the board members would consult me while James remained sidelined. I had hoped that this situation would motivate James to work harder, but instead he grew even more disengaged from his responsibilities. Although he would show up at the office in the morning, he would disappear by noon and spend the rest of the day at home. When he saw me at home, he rarely discussed work, seemingly indifferent to the company's affairs. Meanwhile, my workload at the company increased, and I became busier. With the support of our hard-working employees, I was dedicated to increasing sales and profits for the sake of our workers. Running the company became increasingly intriguing to me, and I became fully engrossed in my work. Conversely, James appeared to be losing interest, and his presence at the company diminished conversations between us at home. Conversations between us at home became scarce, and our relationship started to strain around that time. I coincidentally ran into your sister Megan today, and we had lunch together. James came home and casually mentioned this. Megan, who is 2 years older than me, recently divorced about 6 months ago. The cause of her divorce was infidelity on her part, which resulted in a major commotion when her enraged husband stormed our parents' home since I was busy with work. James went to my parents' house to calm down Megan's husband on my behalf. James, with his gentle upbringing and calming personality, managed to convince Megan's raging husband to leave temporarily. Later, Megan praised James, saying, "Your husband is really something. He handled my raging husband so effortlessly." This incident seemed to change Megan's perception of James. Previously, She had viewed him as a rich, pampered son who was not particularly attractive and indecisive, but after witnessing his handling of the situation, she began to see him as a respectable business owner. Megan, now single after her divorce, probably saw James as a great catch since she had always been attracted to wealthy men. However, engrossed in my work, I couldn't fathom such a possibility. Of course, my sister had no idea that James was merely a nominal executive who didn't actually manage the company. Megan's ex-husband, an elite employee of a foreign company, bragged at their wedding, saying, "My husband is an excellent employee with a high salary, and on top of that, he's handsome." "You must be jealous, aren't you?" Her ex-husband was indeed handsome, smart, and had a stylish vibe. I couldn't understand why she would cheat on such a wonderful husband. 3 months after James had lunch with Megan, he came home looking unusually serious. "I have something to discuss." It was the first time I had heard such words from him, and my heart raced with a sense of foreboding as I waited for him to speak. He dropped a bombshell. "Actually, Megan is pregnant with my child, and I want a divorce." I was shocked by his request for a divorce, but even more so by the revelation that Megan was carrying his child. I asked him, "So you want to marry my sister James?" Looking troubled, he replied, "It's not that I want to marry her, but if she's having my baby, I guess I have no choice." It was James's typical indecisiveness. I responded, "Well, if she's carrying your baby, I suppose it can be helped. Let's discuss this when she comes over." It seemed that my husband and I couldn't make any decisions together. I decided to meet with my sister directly to figure things out. Although deep down I had already made up my mind about the divorce, I realized I needed to consult my father-in-law about the company's situation. As the daughter-in-law of the founder, I was involved in running the business. However, if I divorced, I would become a stranger to the company. My mother-in-law, who was present, was thrilled about her son having a child, but she fell silent when my father-in-law glared at her. It seemed that my mother-in-law was more concerned about her grandson than the company's management. After some thought, my father-in-law smiled and said, "I want you to continue being involved in the company's management as you have been. I don't care about James. I'll take the responsibility, so let him do as he likes." It was clear that my father-in-law valued the company's management more than his son or grandchild. Even though he had retired as the founder, he still held significant power in the company. With most of the shares in his name, there were no executives who would go against his will. I was also becoming increasingly interested in my work, and though reluctant to give up now that my job was settled, it was time to discuss the future with my sister. On my day off, my sister came to my house with a big smile and said, "Eva, it's a pity you couldn't have a baby. I'll give you plenty of consolation money. Please leave this house immediately." She spoke with a triumphant air while my husband silently listened without saying a word. Appalled by my husband's indifferent expression, I replied, "It's okay to get divorced, but there's also the issue of alimony and division of property. Let's bring in a lawyer and handle this properly. I never thought that you, my sister, would fall for a man like James." With a hint of irony, my sister glared at me momentarily but quickly regained her composure. It finally dawned on me that it's not about looks for men, it's about what's inside. It was amusing to hear my sister speak as if she fully understood my husband's inner self, holding back my laughter. I said, "That's great, isn't it? From now on, live happily with James." My sister seemed to have the impression that my husband was the president of my father-in-law's company, but it appeared that she hadn't heard anything from him. When the discussion concluded, my sister announced that she would start living in my house and brought a moving company. However, I had already arranged for a new apartment, so I only took out the necessary items, knowing my sister's quick temper. I had also hired a lawyer and prepared documents for the division of property and alimony claims. The following day, after moving my belongings, I sat down with my husband and sister, accompanied by my lawyer, to negotiate alimony and the division of property. My husband sat with an indifferent expression while my sister did all the talking. She reiterated her willingness to pay as much alimony as I wanted, urging me to decide at my convenience. Hearing her words, my lawyer suggested claiming alimony not only for my husband but also from my sister, considering her history of paying alimony to her ex-husband. Although it might be challenging to claim alimony from her given the installment payments, my lawyer believed it was worth pursuing since she had offered to pay as much as I wanted regarding the division of property. My sister eagerly claimed this mansion originally belonged to James's family, so it shouldn't be part of the division of property. The lawyer answered my sister emotionlessly that this building and the land belonged to the company, so it's up to the company to decide. It seemed like even my husband thought this house belonged to his father, so he casually asked my sister. On the other hand, she was taken aback and attacked the lawyer, saying, "Wait a minute, so does that mean I can't live in this house?" At this comment, my sister seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. "Oh, you should have said that earlier. It'll be fine since James, the president, will be living here." The lawyer looked surprised for a moment, then burst into laughter. "What are you talking about? Ava is the president, not James." Looking at my sister, who was planning to remarry my husband, and yet she didn't even know that fact, made me laugh. My sister immediately turned to my husband and yelled, James, you're not the president." I stepped in for my husband, who looked troubled, and explained to my sister that James is merely an advisor without any executive rights. "I'm an executive director, and I was also made president by our father-in-law. The founder had always been the president, but when he retired, he made me an executive director, and even the other executives also appreciated my performance, and there was no opposition." On the other hand, my husband, thanks to his father's arrangement, was receiving an executive salary as an advisor without any executive rights. It was more of a pity than being a mere employee, even though it was called an executive salary. Since he wasn't really doing any work, it was less than what an ordinary employee would receive, so I was bearing all the living expenses. My husband, who didn't care about our household finances, didn't even care whether the house he was living in was company-owned or belonged to his father. Although our homeless company owned it, my responsible father-in-law had always charged me rent. Though I thought of it as a normal rental property, the lawyer is still laughing. He asked me, "Can we continue to rent this house to James?" My sister reacted to the rent part of the lawyer's question. "What do you mean by rent? Are you suggesting that I take rent from James?" The lawyer presented the rent amount, laughing heartily at her words. She was shocked to see the figure, and so was her husband. James, who seemed to be hearing about it for the first time, guess a house this big does have a high rent. "I can't afford that with my salary." He said his executive compensation would barely leave any money behind if he had to pay that rent. Their living expenses would be hard to cover during the 5 years of their marriage. James had used up all his modest executive compensation. My salary also disappeared in high rent and living expense. There were hardly any assets left, and splitting the savings was the only way for asset division. After the lawyer left, my sister, who now knew that the mansion she had been hoping for was actually rented, seemed utterly deflated, staring blankly. James was grinning as usual. I suggested, "Why don't we vacate this place and go back to your parents' house? Your mother was so happy about the pregnancy news." James agreed, but I laughed at the thought of why I had to consider this man who was about to be my ex this much. I started worrying whether this unreliable man could raise a child, but I decided to leave it as it was. It was none of my business. I asked my sister, who seemed to have forgotten about her own alimony. "Are you okay with the alimony payment, sis? You seem pretty confident, but you're also paying your ex-husband, right?" She was stunned to hear this, her face suddenly snapping back to reality. "I have to pay it too." She was astonished, seemingly having heard nothing of the discussion earlier in the day. "You said I'd give plenty of alimony, but you weren't expecting me to pay it, right? My salary is really low." James and my sister exchanged surprised glances, And the lawyer watching these two made me want to burst into laughter. I had already obtained signatures on the divorce papers and alimony request documents, though it didn't matter to me. Seeing James and my sister like this was pathetic. My ex-husband, who had remarried my sister, had returned to his parents' home just as I had warned, but there seemed to be constant quarrels between my sister and my in-laws. The main cause of the conflict was the lie about my sister being pregnant with my ex-husband's child. His mother, who was hoping for an heir, was extremely angry. My father-in-law, who had disliked my sister for stealing his son from me from the very beginning, hadn't even spoken to her. He fronted the alimony for James and paid me in full, but my sister, seeing this, pleaded with him, "Dad, could you please pay my alimony as well?" To this, my father-in-law responded, "I have no reason to be called Dad by you." He was fuming, not being able to obtain anything she had hoped for. My sister ran away from my ex-husband's family home without a word and went missing. She had practically remarried the ex-husband just to bear the burden of alimony, which was utterly foolish. My ex-husband seemed to consider getting back with me, but his father scolded him, saying, "You're the kind of man who should never even think about having a family. You can't even take care of yourself properly." I wouldn't get back with my ex-husband even if he begged me. I had stopped believing in him when he cheated on me with my sister, and I was disgusted by his indifferent attitude during our discussions. He was dismissed from his executive position and is now working as a temporary employee. I've continued being the CEO, which is the core thing in my life. I don't even think about remarrying someone after the breakup. I've kept in touch with my father-in-law, receiving advice when needed. For now, I want to focus on the company, thinking of it as being married to it for the sake of my employees.